Let us, in all reverence and humility, invoke the presence of the great architect of the universe. Mighty God, as we gather this afternoon to deliberate on a most important subject, not just for Jamaica, but globally, let us be guided by your presence so that the deliberations and the presenters and the interventions will be to the greater glory of our country. For these and other mercies, we ask in your precious name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Dr. Ferguson. We have a little bit of housekeeping to do before we begin our presentations. I would like to introduce Mrs. Juliet Cuthbert Flynn, the Member of Parliament for West Rural St. Andrew, and I've already acknowledged Dr. Fenton Ferguson. Madam Secretary has disappeared for a minute. Do we expect anyone else? Any other members indicated whether they can make it? No. All right, well, we hope that others, we are properly constituted as a quorum, however, and so the business of the committee may go on. We hope to complete this session as close to 4:30 as possible, and presenters will be guided by the time limitations, And I'll get to the specific presentations in a moment. Yes, we expect presentations today from the Lawyers Christian Fellowship, the Jamaica Coalition for a Healthy Society, the Love March Movement, and Mrs. Shirley Richards. Wasn't there a carryover from last meeting? The coalition. So the coalition would start then, being the carryover from last time. Are you comfortable there, or would you like to come up higher or closer? You're okay? All right. I'm thinking of the visibility of those in the gallery. Yes, please come. Feel free. So this is number one. Mm-hmm. Now, committee members, who has requested? All of them. Mm-hmm. We have set ourselves a practice that each group presenting would be allotted a 15-minute time period. The committee has been approached by the presenters today asking for extra time. The secretary has polled some of the members or got responses from her poll, and I gather that while we are willing to accommodate, we must say that we're not impressed by very long presentations. Do I reflect the sentiment? Yes? And so, presenters, we will allow you to a little extra time, but please recognize that a lot of the presentations, we have excellent ones, are repetitive, and therefore it is best if you contain your presentations as much as possible. Will that be acceptable? Good.
Tabled the presentation. I believe the salient points, that one would want to make, and the interaction thereafter.
Sure.
After that 15 minutes should be adequate.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah.
We'll be guided by that too.
Yeah.
I'd like to make it clear that it is always open to the members of the committee to ask questions for clarification of any presentation. this is not the occasion for disputation, cross-examination, etc. We don't need to do that. The proceedings of this committee on what is a very controversial topic has up to now been ironic and calm, and we believe that it is that those characteristics are both lead to wisdom and inspiration. The members of the presenters need to know that all your points of view expressed orally and also in your written presentations will form, without exception, the basis for the report which the committee, at the end of our deliberations, will present to Parliament, to the whole House. That will be debated. You will be invited to be present, if you wish, to observe those deliberations. And if the reports are approved, they go to the cabinet of the country for a determination as to any subsequent action, which would then have to come back to Parliament. So the point I wish to make is that this is a profoundly democratic exercise and that everyone's views are to be respected. Thank you. Members, we have before us the for confirmation, the minutes of February 22nd and March 27th. I believe they have been previously circulated electronically, and if that is so, and if it is your will, may we have a motion for their confirmation? Thank you, Mrs. Cuthbert-Flynn. Seconded. Thank you, Dr. Ferguson. The minutes of those two meetings are confirmed. We have one other logistical matter to deal with. We had set subsequent hearings on this motion for May 1st and May 22nd. The Secretary informs me that those two dates are no longer available to us because of sectoral presentations on those dates. And therefore, during our presentations today, I'm asking Ms. Brandon to try and identify two other Wednesdays, which will not be so cluttered, which we can assign to those who have submitted and wish to continue their presentations to do so. Would you? Good. That being the case, the matter before the committee this afternoon is the continuation of the committee's deliberation on the motion number 61, tabled in the House of Representatives and referred to this committee by Mrs. Juliet Cuthbert-Flynn, proposing consideration of reform of the law in relation to abortion in Jamaica. And our first presenter this afternoon will be the Jamaica Coalition for a Healthy Society. I would ask the representative to identify yourselves and to begin your presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members and the public in the gallery. My name is Dr. Doreen Brady-West, and I am a member of the Jamaica Coalition for a Healthy Society and the chair of its Ethics Committee. I'll be making a brief presentation, and Mrs. Bridge will follow me with an even briefer one, I hope. So, in the interest of time, Mr. Chairman, my oral presentation is going to focus briefly on a respectful critique of the private member's motion number 61, which concurs with the recommendation of the APRAG report and proposes a repeal of Section 72 and 73 of the Offences Against the Person Act to be replaced by the Termination of Pregnancy Act. Now, the motion cites the results of the poll in 2018 that 62% of men and 82% of women believe that the government has no place in determining if or when a woman ends her pregnancy. However, the motion fails to cite the 75% of Jamaicans also polled at the same time who want no change to the law as it currently stands. Thus, we see that 75% of Jamaicans would reject this motion, which proposes a repeal of the law. The motion also claims that Section 72 and 73 effectively would make healthcare facilities that care for women after they have attempted abortions, would make those facilities accessories after the fact to a crime. This is a questionable assertion in my view, in view of the legal and ethical duty of doctors to care for all persons, irrespective of the circumstances of their injuries. In fact, to do otherwise would be arguably be criminal negligence. Thirdly, the motion implies that the right to abortion, which is in fact the killing of the unborn child, is necessary for a woman to enjoy, I quote, personhood without interference. Well, what does this mean, I would ask? Does this mean that a woman is not a full person unless she has the right to kill her unborn child? Next, I turn to the APRAG. The terms of reference of the Abortion Policy Review Advisory Group posited the need for reduction in maternal mortality as an MDG goal, Millennium Development Goal 2015, as the basis for making, I quote again, safe abortions accessible to all. However, the APRAG report failed to consider, firstly, the reported complications of legal abortions, including physical, emotional, and psychological effects, which are well reported and amply demonstrated in a plethora of literature and reports. Secondly, it did not consider the evidence in countries which have lowered maternal mortality rates without legalizing abortion. And the publication on the Lancet of 2010, volume 375, well describes this phenomenon. Thus, we can see that legalizing abortion is neither necessary nor sufficient for reducing maternal mortality rates. Thirdly, the APRAG report failed to consider the strategies that are necessary to prevent the majority of maternal deaths, because abortion does not constitute the majority of these deaths. And these can be addressed without any paradigm shift in the law, and certainly without deliberately killing small human beings. It has been said, Mr. Chairman, that the care of human life is the first and only legitimate object of good government. Well, the science of embryology tells us that the human embryo begins his or her existence at fertilization and is a new living member of the human species. And further, logically, there is no other point along the natural trajectory of his or her existence when it can be claimed that a living human being begins to exist, because then we'd be forced to answer the question of what was there before that point. The fetus is human because of the possession of human DNA and demonstrates scientifically acceptable signs of life. At conception, a unique entity is formed which undergoes no change to his or her essential nature, but undergoes progressive, self-directed maturation in relation to structure and to function. Thus, the embryo acts as a coordinated organism. Further, the long-desired baby of previously infertile parents is the same in essence as a child conceived under less than ideal circumstances, and is a bearer of the same fundamental human rights. They are equally members of the human race. So not only is the humanity of the child in the womb independent of wantedness, but also his or her identity does not change with development. The adult human beings sitting in this chamber are the same human beings who were previously adolescents, children, infants, and fetuses. The idea of legalizing abortions only up to 12 weeks, which is not what is stated by APRAG or the Termination of Pregnancy Act, this adjustment has no rational or logical or scientific basis. It seems to me to be pure pragmatism, not principle, because at 12 weeks, the fetus begins to swallow, her kidneys are making urine, her bone marrow is making blood cells, and her heart has been pumping blood for the past 8 weeks. So what critical defining change takes place at 6 weeks? None, I submit none. Changes are those of size and development and are entirely analogous to the differences or the changes that occur between a newborn and becoming a toddler or a small child. There is therefore no essential difference between first trimester, second trimester, third trimester abortions or infanticide. The difference is merely one of technique. The method of killing must be modified for safety reasons, but the identity of the human being who is being killed is the same. So we rightly condemn discrimination on the basis of race or sex or zone of residence. And how can it be now that Jamaican law should enshrine the most extreme form of discrimination, leading to the ultimate act of violence on the basis of size, gestational age, level of development, or even intrauterine address? The law rightly restricts individual choice when the option being considered is potentially harmful to self, other human beings, or the good of society. Based on the nature of the fetus from conception, legal prohibition of abortion is justified on all of these grounds. Society has an obligation to provide humane alternatives for women in crisis pregnancies, but the law has no obligation to give approval to every option or choice. The duty of the state cannot extend to legalization of the killing of a human being simply based on circumstances. Faced with the real problem of crisis pregnancy, we need to terminate the crisis and not the pregnancy. Natural justice suggests that the vulnerability of the unborn child, far from being a basis for devaluation, is a qualification for special protection. And this concept is well expressed in the UN Declaration on the Rights of the Child, which mandates legal protection for children before and after birth. I submit that the definition of risk to maternal health in Section 3B, page 7 of the Termination of Pregnancy Act is broad enough to include any reason for desiring abortion, and therefore it tantamount to abortion on demand. Further, while purporting to permit conscientious objection in Section 6, the Termination of Pregnancy Act undermines that very principle in Section 14.5 by criminalizing those medical personnel who will not refer women for procedure they find objectionable on grounds of conscience. The inclusion of a substantial risk for disability as grounds for abortion is worrisome. There are many persons with significant disabilities who have done yeoman service to Jamaica and continue to do so. I mentioned with her permission among them Sarah Newland Martin. Although these worrisome but well-documented aspects of APRAG recommendations are now being disavowed, they speak to the thinking and philosophy behind the document. We submit that respect for human life at all stages should be a core value for law and public policy. Additionally, any decision made to legalize abortion will have far-reaching social consequences because the state will, in fact, be denying the intrinsic worth of every human being and allowing value to be assigned based on circumstances and convenience. This committee is rightly concerned with human resources and social development, but human beings are the most precious resource of any nation. Respect for all human life and investing in stable family structure are proven strategies for promoting social development. The Jamaica Coalition for Health Society therefore urges the committee to abandon this motion and to pursue policies that are compatible with our national pledge so that Jamaica may play her part in advancing the welfare of the whole human race. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brady. Members, I'm going to suggest that we allow Mrs. Bridge to make her presentation since it's part of the same group, and then open for your questions and comments. Mrs. Bridge, thank you very much. You may proceed. And thank you, Dr. Brady, for staying within the time frame.
I don't know. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I thank you for the privilege of allowing me to speak on behalf of those who have no voice, the unborn. I had a very inconvenient pregnancy. I was being treated with a powerful drug for a particular brain tumor called a prolactinoma. I think it's giving trouble when I became pregnant. The immediate reaction of the highly qualified professor at the University Hospital of the West Indies was to insist that the only course of action was for me to have an abortion, and as quickly as possible. His reasons were, 1, the drug would result in fetal abnormality, and 2, the tumor would most likely grow during the strong possibility of causing blindness because of its proximity to my optic nerve. Despite the physical consequences he stated, what seemed obvious to the doctor was not obvious to me, because even at that stage, with my limited knowledge, it was clear to me that I would be killing a life distinct from my own. Subsequent discussions with the doctor proved to be even more dire regarding the medical outcomes of keeping my child. Yet 9 months later, I delivered a perfectly healthy baby girl with no adverse physical effects to myself. I never conceived again. Our daughter is the only child of my husband and myself. Our academically gifted, kind, and beautiful daughter got married last year. I don't know how many persons know this, but a female child is born with all the eggs that she will ever have over the course of her life. Consequently, within my daughter's ovaries, she carries our possible grandchildren and future generations. When you abort a child, you not only terminate that immediate life, but any potential offspring that would come through that child. Had I listened to my doctor, my only child and future generations would have been irrevocably destroyed. The reason for my telling my personal story is because I believe there are some issues in it that are applicable to the general discussion surrounding whether or not Jamaica should change its present abortion law. Firstly, with the best of intentions, even highly qualified doctors make mistakes and misdiagnose. When I presented my perfectly healthy baby daughter to the doctor who had advised that I abort, his remark was, "Well, I am not God." I would venture to say that it is possible that several persons would not be in this very chamber today had their mothers listened to their doctor's advice to abort them. We cannot rely on doctors telling us that for possible medical, emotional, and mental health reasons, we should murder our children. Are we to understand that because someone may be born disabled, that they are therefore disposable and not worthy of life? Are we to understand also that because a pregnancy happens under less than ideal conditions, that we should not allow that person the chance to live? Life is a messy business at the best of times. Yet that life is a distinct life with a completely unique genetic identity separate from the mother. Between 17 to 21 days, that baby's heart is beating, and by 10 weeks, that baby is able to feel pain. How many women would choose to abort their babies if they understood these facts, much less if they knew that their babies could feel pain during that very abortion procedure? I certainly wasn't given these facts. It was more a case of this needs to be done immediately and quickly because at this stage it is just a clump of cells. But we now know from leading embryology texts that from the moment the sperm meets the egg, human development begins. I quote from Embryo Ethics by Professor Robert George of Princeton: "The adult human being that is now you or me is the same being who at an earlier stage was an adolescent, and before that a child, an infant, a fetus, and an embryo. The degree of development isn't what makes a human being valuable. Rather, all human beings are valuable because of the kind of being they are. And a human embryo is of a different kind than that of a potato or a rhinoceros," end of quote. In addition, I was never at any stage presented with all the possible mental, emotional, and physical complications that can be attendant on abortion, such as possible scarring of the uterine lining, perforated uterus, cut or torn cervix affecting future pregnancies, blood clots, pelvic infection, hemorrhage, and on, not to mention post-abortive stress syndrome and all that entails. The need for an abortion was simply presented to me as what must be done because of the current concerns as the doctor saw them. In the rush to solve a perceived crisis, abortion is often seen as an end in itself to solve an immediate problem, without taking into consideration the many complex issues arising, including the other two distinct individuals involved, the baby and sometimes the father. Certainly, it would stand to reason that where counseling, other options and alternatives are presented and made available, and women have the opportunity to overcome their immediate fears, the apparent need for abortion would likely decrease significantly. Taking a life of a child should never be the solution to a problem. It might well be said that I was fortunate because my case turned out well, but I didn't know that would be the outcome when I made my decision for life. The point is really to do with whether one has a worldview which supports life, or a utilitarian worldview which decides that life is only worthy when it is useful. That is a worldview that resulted in the Holocaust. The value of a person is not based on his or her usefulness. While it is never easy to have a child with abnormalities, you don't love a child because of its perfection, but simply because it is a child, a human being deserving of life with intrinsic value in him or herself. I urge the committee to leave our abortion law as it is, and not to move to a law which is, one, against the will of the majority of the Jamaican people, and two, is disingenuous and subject to abuse, because while the recommendation is for abortion up to 22 weeks, it also allows for abortion at any stage of the pregnancy if the woman's mental health is at risk. This is a very convenient loophole that can be taken to mean anything. The current law being used in New York to abort babies at any stage, even right up to delivery, uses just such terminology. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for allowing me to share my personal story to contribute to the current serious discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bridge. The Secretary reminds me, members, that Mrs. Bridge's written presentation was circulated to us earlier. And may I just note that Dr. Brady began at 32 minutes after 2, and Mrs. Bridge's presentation is finished at 2:50. That's a good model. I open the presentation of the Jamaica Coalition for a Healthy Society to the questions. Any questions of the members? Yes, Mrs. Cuthbert-Flynn.
Yes, thank you. I think my first question would be to Dr. West. Would you agree that the law as it is now cause harm to Jamaican women?
Not at all. Not any more than I would say that the law against any other crime harms someone who breaks that law. I don't believe the law does any harm to someone. In breaking the law, some people are harmed, but that's not the fault of the law. I don't believe the law causes harm, no.
So I guess what I wanted to find out is what would you then do to the women? How would you address the women? As the law stands, then it's against abortion. And if women are still seeking abortion, how do you address that problem?
Okay, thank you for that question. Well, first of all, I would say that if one reduces the time to 12 weeks, one would still have to answer that question. What would you want to do with women at 14 weeks who seek abortion? And secondly, in direct answer to your question, I would say that a crime has been committed when one does abortion. All laws have maximum penalties, and judges are not obligated to give the maximum sentence. In fact, judges weigh the circumstances and whether they are mitigating or not under which an offense occurs, and depending on the circumstances and so on, they have a variety of options at their disposal. The Criminal Justice Reform Act allows just for such a thing. For non-custodial sentences, etc. And so that would be my two-part answer to your question. One, unless you allow abortion up to term, you still will have that problem after the date at which you allow it. And secondly, judges have been and will continue, I imagine, to use all the means at their disposal, considering circumstances and so on, to do what they think is best in an individual case.
I guess I wouldn't want to prolong, because I think my question is really, yes, they're being punished and judges are using their discretion, but women are still ending up dying or end up in the hospital. How do you address that? Because they're still harming themselves. So how would you address that?
Well, what I'm trying to say philosophically is that persons are harmed in the breaking of many laws, but I do not believe society has a duty to repeal such laws simply because persons harm themselves in the perpetration of what is a felony. I don't believe the law has that obligation. I think society has an obligation to provide humane alternatives to women who are in crisis, but I don't believe the law has any obligation to repeal a law simply because one in breaking that law can harm themselves. I think public education is important, and meaningful, sympathetic alternatives are important for the state and civil society to establish for those women.
My questions now, I can't see your name tag. Mrs. Carole?
Mrs. Bridge.
Oh, I can't. Okay. What type of prolactinoma did you have?
Well, I'm not really sure. It was a prolactinoma, of that I'm sure, and it was near to my optic nerve.
And what medication were you taking?
It was bromocriptine at the time, and there was supposed to be further medication added to that, but I refused it.
And what was wrong with you? What was going on? Why you had to be on this medication? Did you have a tumor?
I had a tumor, that's what I was saying.
Did the bromocriptine work? Did that shrink your tumor? So you had a prolactinoma, or what was it?
Well, I'm not a doctor, but I had a prolactinoma, which was a brain tumor near to my optic nerve. Mm-hmm. And I had just, maybe it was about a couple of weeks into the treatment when I became pregnant.
And what I'm asking you is, did the bromocriptine shrink your tumor?
It had begun, but it had not shrunk it yet. It hadn't had enough time to take full effect. So do you still
have that tumor now?
No, I do not.
So what happened?
I can only, as the doctor said, he thought it would grow. In the process, I had several CTs, and my eyesight was checked every month to see if it would grow. And at the end, I had to come right off the medication because I chose to keep my child.
Are you aware, though, that there are different types of persons who actually take this? Because I also had the same thing, mm-hmm. but my situation is different. You were having menstrual cycle, I guess, because you said you got pregnant. Are you aware that there are some women who will not have a menstrual cycle because they have a high prolactin level?
Well,
are you aware of that? Are you aware, I think what I'm trying to ask you, are you aware that there are different situations where persons would possibly have to have surgery and not necessarily like you, where your tumor was shrinking? That there are two types of that type of tumor.
I am aware of that.
And so your situation then was different from someone else who would possibly need surgery.
Okay, may I answer you, please? I actually went to the doctor originally to have the diagnosis because I had no menstrual cycle. And the other thing was that they felt it was just on the borderline in size, that perhaps the drug could shrink it without possible surgery. But his recommendation was that if I had my child, it would grow, and then that would involve surgery in the middle of the pregnancy. So it wasn't really that different.
I think, though, what I'm trying to say is there are people with different situations, and with anything in life. I believe that there are people with a different kind of illness who needed surgery. Your tumor shrunk. Some people, you said it went away. That's what you said to me, that your tumor just disappeared.
Well, at the time of our decision about keeping my child, it had not.
Right, but eventually it disappeared. So what you said, you were never able to conceive again. Was it because of the prolactinoma?
I really don't know why I was never able to conceive again, but I think the point that I was making is whatever the circumstance had been, I would have chosen life.
And I think one other question. What were some of the things that was happening to you when you had your prolactinoma?
Would you want me to give specifics?
Yes, specifics.
Well, I had no period at all, no menstrual cycle.
But you got pregnant.
It just was that way. That's the reason why I did the CT.
What else was happening to you?
Well, I was having headaches, very severe migraines. I can't really remember what else at the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I may want to rebut what you said. As I said, I know of persons who have the same thing that you had, whose tumor would not shrink and was in the same situation as you were and had to have an abortion because that person's life would have been in danger, and that person is me.
May I reply, honorable member?
I chose my life. I chose my life over something that I was not certain about. I did not plan on it, and because I was told that I could not have gotten pregnant, right? And it doesn't mean I went on to have 2 more children. It doesn't mean, as you state, that you chose life because you are for life. I think people who have abortions, it's not that they're not for life. It is not that they're not for life. Why they choose to have an abortion. It is possibly their circumstance why they choose to have an abortion. And that person was me at the age 19. And so I had a brain tumor that was pressing on my optic nerve, that was creating severe headaches, that I would have gone blind. I was 19, and I had to have surgery. That's the difference between you and myself. You did not need surgery, apparently, because your tumor was shrinking. Your tumor was shrinking, mine wasn't. And therefore, this was a life-saving effort for me in order, because my headaches were so severe that I could not function. I was not functioning. I was passing out every week. I was fainting, dropping down on the track. Okay? Ending up in the hospital on a drip, not knowing what was wrong with me. And I was not going to take that chance. I wanted to live, me. And so I'm here, and I was able to have a child and another one after. So again, the point I'm trying to make is there are many situations in life that is not just black and white, and it's not just the same for everyone. And I don't think, even if my doctor made a mistake at the time in Philadelphia, I never had any remorse for what I chose to do that day. None. I chose life at that moment because my life was on the line. You chose to take the medication, but that was the difference. You had the option to continue your medication and shrink your tumor. I didn't. Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry to have heard about your dilemma, member, but one, my medication had not yet begun to take effect. I did run the risk of losing my sight, and I did run the risk of, losing that child and all that goes along with it. But I think, with due respect, although I'm very cognizant of all that you say, that my worldview made all the difference, because I could have ended up with a disabled child and a loss of sight. And even if it had meant I was having severe headaches too, and even if it meant that somewhere in the pregnancy, which a doctor did advise me of, that I might have to have surgery because of the optic nerve, I think what I would have done, I would have had the baby delivered. I would have wanted to give my child every chance to live. I did take that option without knowing what the outcome would be. Nevertheless, I hear what you say. Thank you.
This is, one understands the depth of feeling that's being expressed here. I'm reminding us that argumentation is not the need of this committee. Rather, we need to hear differing points of view, testimonies as they have evinced right now. Dr. Ferguson, you had a question?
So, Mrs. Bridge, you made mention, and this is just for clarity, that a female would born with all her eggs. And I picked up the impression that you're saying if that female were to have an abortion, that female would not be able to conceive thereafter. Was that what you were saying? Oh.
That's not what I meant. I was saying that because I never conceived again, had I destroyed my child, she has all her eggs, and that is my future generation. So having destroyed her, I would have destroyed any possible grandchildren and on and on. That's what I was saying.
Coalition for a Healthy Society, we thank you for your presentation. We move on now to the Lawyers Christian Fellowship. Mrs. Coley Nicholson, will you lead?
On behalf of the Lawyers Christian Fellowship, I thank the committee for this opportunity to make these submissions. Mr. Chairman, Private Members' Motion number 61 of 2018 asks Parliament, and by extension the people of Jamaica, to effectively legalize abortion on demand. Among other things, the motion resolves that, quote, this Honourable House consider the recommendations of the Abortion Policy Review Group, which was established to provide guidance to allow women the right to choose, and take steps to repeal Section 72 and 73 of the Offences Against the Person Act. APRAG recommended that the criminal law be replaced by a civil law titled Termination of Pregnancy Act. Under that proposed act, abortion on demand would be available up to 22 weeks of pregnancy, and thereafter if there were special indications. These special indications allow consideration of several factors, including the interests of other children in the pregnant woman's family, as well as her entire social and economic circumstances, whether actual or foreseeable. The threshold, Mr. Chairman, for establishing the existence of these special indications is very low. Acceptance of the motion would therefore pave the way for abortion on demand at all stages of pregnancy. The Lawyers Christian Fellowship holds the view that life begins from the moment of conception, and that abortion is the killing of an innocent unborn child. We say it is inconsistent to condemn the wanton violence and murder in Jamaica while condoning abortion. We condemn the emerging culture of death and ask our Parliament and society to choose life, that of the mother and the unborn child. Let us save them both. Government has an obligation to help protect citizens from violence, sickness, and death, and must therefore take all necessary steps to reduce and eliminate maternal mortality, which is a concern we see in the motion. However, the LCF disagrees that government has an obligation to reduce maternal mortality by legalizing abortion. APRAG's final report calls for abortion to be legalized and abortion centers to be established in every parish in Jamaica. The justification given is the high incidence of maternal mortality and morbidity. Mr. Chairman, we accept and adopt statements made by previous presenters, including medical practitioners, that there is no such thing as a safe abortion, given the possible medical, psychological, and psychiatric consequences that often arise. Further, I crave the committee's indulgence to refer to and quote statements made by renowned consultant obstetrician and gynecologist Dr. Clive Lai at a continuing legal professional development CLPD seminar in September 2018. Dr. Lai was speaking in his personal capacity and not as president of the Medical Association of Jamaica. Among other things, Dr. Lai said the mortality rate from abortion has significantly declined, although the incidence of botched abortions has increased. He also spoke about the proposal to legalize abortion. I have some quotes. He said, fact number one, The maternal mortality rate for abortion has declined over the years, that it is now number 8 or maybe 7 on the list. It is at the bottom. Why is it so? Because both doctors and non-medicals have been moving away from instrumentation, and they have been prescribing the pills. So the maternal mortality rate has decreased. There is no denying that, but they keep telling you that it is the third leading cause. Fact number 2, incomplete abortions have increased because they're using these tablets and not telling mothers what to do after they get it. And you keep hearing that they want to decriminalize it, legalize abortion, because they want to reduce the number of botched abortions. Stating that legalization would increase the number of botched abortions, Dr. Lai said, the more abortions that you do, is the more botched abortions you are going to get. Let us say you're doing 10 abortions per month and 7 are botched. That's the 70% botched rate. You legalize it, so you're doing 100 and only 12 are botched, and you say, well, see, that is 12%. But look at the absolute numbers. There are now 12 patients ending up at Jubilee compared to 7. So there are more people going to the hospital because you're doing more and more. In medicine, the more that you do, the more complications will come your way. The more procedures, the more surgeries you do, you're going to get complications. Finally, on the proposal to legalize abortion, Dr. Lai had this to say: the majority of the people want to do it for socio-economic reasons, as a form of family planning, and you get an increased number of your botched abortions. Your physical complications, as well as psychological complications, such as guilt, regret, and depression. 81% of women go through that. So obviously not all women do go through it, but quite a number of them do. According to the motion, Jamaican parliamentarians have a moral obligation to ensure women can enjoy their personhood without interference. Is this a reference to interference by the state or interference by the unwanted child? The truth is that a pregnant woman is not a sole person. There is a child, another human being growing within her. And I recommend just looking at those slides that are being shown. They're magnified, but that's what's there. And there's something there from the moment of conception. To not protect the unborn child is to deny the value of human life. Biological science confirms that life commences at conception and goes through a process of development, maturation, and natural death as part of a cycle which starts in the womb and continues after birth. Our position is that there cannot be a moral obligation to protect the personhood of a woman without due and proper regard to the life she carries. The motion refers to the results of a 2006 public opinion survey which alleges 60% of Jamaicans support the legalization of termination of pregnancy under, quote, special conditions, end quote, such as incest, endangerment of the woman's physical or mental health and or life. And a 2018 poll is also cited, alleging 67% of men and 82% of women believe the government has no place in determining if or when a woman ends her pregnancy. The LCF submits that no decision on the matter ought properly to be premised on those public opinion survey and poll results. It should be noted that a recent poll by the highly respected pollster Don Anderson in February to March 2019 revealed that 11% of Jamaicans supported abortion in cases of rape and incest, while 5.25% of the population supported abortion on demand. So the numbers used to support the motion should at the very least be questioned. We're of the view that a public education campaign on the issues concerning abortion would likely reduce the minority support for abortion even further. So there should be full disclosure on the abortion process. People should see those pictures, see those images of the baby. Various arguments have been advanced to dehumanize, delegitimize the child growing in the womb, and to desensitize the people of Jamaica to the horror and violence of the process of abortion. There needs to be full and frank disclosure of the risk of the surgery or other procedures undertaken to kill and then expel the child from the womb. With the advances in science and technology, experts advise it is now possible to save the lives of both mother and child, where previously the pregnancy threatened the life of the mother. Science will no doubt continue to advance, lessening the age of fetal viability outside the mother's womb. These and other hard cases do not constitute statistically or morally a basis to legislate the killing of babies. Students of the law say hard cases make bad law. In closing, Mr. Chairman, we pray that the work of this committee will strengthen us, the weak, to cherish, that our laws preserving the value of human life will not be changed, that real action to help girls and women in crisis will be expanded, that the abortion industry in Jamaica and the world will itself be aborted, that men and women will exercise wisdom and discernment in their behavioral choices, that they will choose abstinence until marriage and fidelity thereafter, and that the dignity of marriage and the value of human life from conception to natural death will be exalted and become the ideal to which every Jamaican will aspire and live by. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My colleague Jamila Thomas will now address you on Jamaica's obligation under international law with respect to abortion, something raised in the motion, and will also briefly take a closer look at the Termination of Pregnancy Act as proposed by APRAG.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Coley-Nicholson. Yes, Mrs. Thomas.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, our international law obligations do not impose any duty on us to legalize abortion, but on the contrary, imposes a duty on us to protect the life of the unborn child. There is no widespread consistent state practice that can be pointed at to assert a right to an abortion under customary international law. No right to an abortion, whether explicitly or implicitly, can be found in any treaty Jamaica has ratified. In fact, the word abortion cannot be found anywhere in their texts. International organizations and international associations that advance a right to an abortion do not rely on the text of these treaties themselves, but rather recommendations made by bodies referred to as treaty monitoring bodies or compliance committees, which have no legislative or interpretive authority. These bodies were set up for the sole purpose of monitoring treaty compliance and to make recommendations with respect to the rights stated in the treaties and not to create new rights. Private Members' Motion number 61 of 2018 asserts that the government of Jamaica is required by the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, commonly referred to as CEDAW, to legalize abortion. However, no such obligation has been imposed upon us by this treaty. Jamaica's obligations under CEDAW merely imposes an obligation to provide for the protection of women during and after pregnancy by ensuring the existence of an adequate health system poised to deal with the challenges faced in pregnancies to ensure the highest standard of care, and to provide widespread family planning services which do not include abortion. Now, what of reproductive health and rights? The right to health in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights does not impose an obligation to permit abortion, but is in fact consistent with protecting the unborn child. Article 12 of that covenant states, the state parties to the present covenant recognize the right of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. The steps to be taken by the state parties to the present covenant to achieve the full realization of this right shall include those necessary for the provision for the reduction of the stillbirth rate and of infant mortality and for the healthy development of the child. The term reproductive rights emerged from the 1994 International Conference on Population and Development in Cairo and was adopted at the 1995 Fourth World Conference on Women held in Beijing, referred to as the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, which has been mentioned in the private members' motion along with the Sustainable Development Goals. Let us be clear that by their very nature, such instruments or documents do not in fact cannot create legal binding international obligations. They are not treaties. They are merely recommendations or declarations. In any event, none of these documents can be properly interpreted as suggesting the notion of a right to an abortion. Both the ICPD and the Beijing Platform recognize that in no case should abortion be used as a method of family planning, and that any measures or changes relating to abortion within the health system can only be determined at the national or local level according to the national legislative process. How then can it be correctly asserted that the government is required to legalize abortion by virtue of these documents when they are not treaties and the documents themselves require no such thing? The right to liberty, privacy, and security. Having regard to the fundamental nature of the right to life, no well-recognized human right can properly be interpreted as giving a right to an abortion. The right to life is regarded as the most fundamental of human rights because the enjoyment of the right to life is a necessary condition of the enjoyment of all other human rights. All other rights must be subject to and exercised in a way consistent with the supremacy of the right to life. Consequently, the right to liberty, privacy, and security of the person found in the ICCPR and the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights also cannot properly be used to support a right to an abortion, as such rights cannot be exercised in a way to infringe the most fundamental of human rights, the right to life. What does international law say about the unborn child? Whilst no right to an abortion can be found in international law, support for the protection of the unborn child can be found in all the relevant treaties Jamaica has ratified. Jamaica has an international obligation to protect the unborn child. There are 4 international treaties that Jamaica has ratified that imposes an obligation to protect the right to life. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights states at Article 6, every human being has the inherent right to life. This right shall be protected by law. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his life. The Inter-American Convention on Human Rights says at Article 4.1, every person has the right to have his life respected. This right shall be protected by law and in general from the moment of conception. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his life. The Convention on the Rights of the Child also requires Jamaica to protect the life of the unborn child. I will not read what those articles says, but it is there in the written submissions. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which Jamaica ratified in March 2007, states at Article 10, states parties reaffirm that every human being has the inherent right to life and shall take all necessary measures to ensure its effective enjoyment by persons with disabilities on an equal basis with others. Both the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child explicitly state that the right to life is to be protected from the moment of conception. State protection of the developing life of the unborn child from the moment of conception is consistent with the ordinary meaning of the language used in all these treaties, while the notion of a right to an abortion is inconsistent with the ordinary meaning of these treaties. The notion of a right to an abortion deprives the unborn child of the right to life, the most fundamental of human rights. The provisions of the document entitled Termination of Pregnancy Act, relating to the circumstances when an abortion will be lawfully permissible, and that is found at Section 4 of the document, are in clear and quite frankly appalling breach of our international law obligation to protect the right to life of the unborn child. The provisions of Section 4 of the document essentially provides for abortion on demand, as under that section, the unborn child is liable to be killed at any stage of gestation. Section 4 of that document, which permits abortion where there is substantial risks that if born, the child would suffer such physical or mental abnormality as to be seriously handicapped, ignores the right to life of persons who are disabled, and is a discrimination on the basis of disability. Jamaica has ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which requires state parties to the convention to prohibit all forms of discrimination on the basis of disability. To permit abortion on the sole basis of disability is to deny the unborn disabled the right to life without exception from the moment of conception. I conclude this section by saying that there is no right to an abortion in international law. Consequently, Jamaica is not under any international obligation to allow abortions. On the contrary, Jamaica is obliged under international law to protect the unborn child's right to life. Let us not be pawns in the international chess game of human rights, where other cultures' majority values are being pushed on the rest of us as a result of our comparative weakness in the international arena. Instead, let us be true to ourselves and the values our society holds dear. I will now examine the document in some detail, the document entitled Termination of Pregnancy Act, which has been recommended by APRAG to replace Section 72 and Section 73 of the Offences Against the Person
Just
Act.
one moment, Ms. Thomas. Yes. While you may do so, I wish to indicate to you that that document, which has been appropriately referred to in several submissions, we are not, this committee is taking a fresh look at the issue. So we are not in any sense buying into or bound by that. Since it does speak to the subject, I think it is relevant for you to mention it briefly. But I want to make it quite clear that we don't use that document as a foundation or a point of reference at all. Is that clear, members? Yes. Thank you. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I do hear what you say, but I am guided by what the private member's motion says, and it specifically says, be it resolved that this honorable court consider the recommendations of the abortion policy group, which was established to provide guidance to allow women the right to choose. Be it further resolved that this honorable house take steps to repeal Section 72 and 73 of the Offences Against the Persons Act and substitute therewith a civil law titled Termination of Pregnancy Act as recommended by the Abortion Policy Review Group in 2007. So, Mr. Chairman, based on what the motion says, I respectfully submit that the motion is requiring this committee to consider the document entitled Termination of Pregnancy Act. And based on that, Mr. Chairman, if you would indulge me, I would like to examine that document and just point out certain things in respect of that document.
You may do so.
Section 72 of the Offences Against a Person Act already recognizes that the fetus is a person by referring to the pregnant woman as being with child. The use of the word child is a recognition that legally there is already an individual living human being inside the mother regardless of the stage of development. Therefore, the offense of abortion is there to protect that child, and such a protection must remain in place not just for now but for future generations. The document entitled Termination of Pregnancy Act ought to be rejected by this committee. Our government should be seeking to implement laws and policies that promote and strengthen the respect for the sanctity of life, instead of laws that erode respect for the sanctity of life. I have already indicated that the document discriminates against persons with disabilities. What message are we sending to persons with disabilities? That their lives do not matter? The document purports to provide for a woman's reproductive health and rights, but what does reproductive health and reproductive rights mean? The word health means a state of being well in body or mind. Reproduction in this context means reproducing members of the same species. Reproductive health, therefore, speaks to the state of being well to reproduce. Reproductive rights could only properly speak to rights associated with reproduction. How, therefore, does a document which deals with the termination of a pregnancy with the intention to kill the unborn child promote reproductive health? If the government is serious about making provision for reproductive health and reproductive rights, why isn't the focus on implementing and enhancing laws, systems, and policies that promote the well-being of a woman to be able to reproduce, rather than the focus being on implementing a law that allows the unborn child to be killed? The title of the document is a misnomer and can deceive the unsuspecting, because termination of pregnancy is much wider than abortion. Abortion is a deliberate act to kill the unborn child, and not all termination of pregnancies are deliberate or intended to kill the unborn child. The unborn child is described in the document as a product of conception. This in itself is dehumanizing. Black people are human beings, but were described as property during chattel slavery. Unborn children are not mere products of conception. We are talking about human life. As indicated previously, the document allows for abortion on demand. One would be hard-pressed to find a scenario in which a woman who is pregnant would not be able to procure an abortion at any stage of her pregnancy. No consideration has been given to the unborn child's right to life, a right which is the most fundamental of rights. My colleague from JCHS has already addressed the issue in terms of the so-called conscientious objection, so I will not address that as well. In terms of the minor's consent, the document sanctions the performing of abortions on minors without parental consent. This infringes on parental rights and undermines parental authority. The document discriminates against the fathers, without whose seed there will be no pregnancy. It can also be traumatizing to a father if a child is aborted without him knowing. Fathers have a very important role to play in the lives of their children, and so you must consider seriously the message that you are sending to men in our society by seeking to implement a law that would exclude them. The document proposes the repeal of Section 72 and 73 of the Offense Against Persons Act, which legally protects unborn children from abortion, and which are saved in the Charters of Rights. And the Charter of Rights explicitly recognizes these sections as being consistent with its provisions, which include the right to life, the right of every child to such measures of protection as are required by virtue of the status of being a minor or as part of the family, society, and the state. The document in its current form may well be unconstitutional. If the contents of this document becomes law, it also has the potential to open the floodgates, because if it is passed in whole or part, abortion rights advocates may push for more power to terminate, and it could even open the door to infanticide, where if the baby survives the abortion, it is then left on the table to die. This document must be taken no further, we submit, and the contents rejected for the sake of future generations. I thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Lawyers Christian Fellowship. It is now open for any questions which the members may wish to ask. And welcome, Honorable Mr. Teradong. Good. Are there any questions? Sure, Mrs.
I just wanted to state, I know that we're talking a lot about the motion, and we're also leaving out, I think, one of the other things with the motion that was presented in Parliament. We talk about punitive measures, and that's mainly one of the main things. There's a life imprisonment for women who have an abortion, and I also asked for that to be taken off the books. I think you just mentioned about the international treaties, and yes, no country is really bound by any treaty. You have to make your own laws. But there are guidelines in those treaties. And if you may, I want to read something, just a paragraph, and this is from the Beijing Treaty, and it's in section K. It says, in light of paragraph 8.25 of the Program of Action of the International Conference on Population and Development, which states, in no case should abortion be promoted as a method of family planning. I think nobody wants to do that. I don't think Jamaicans, I don't think the Parliament, I don't think any of us want to promote that. All governments and relevant intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations are urged to strengthen their commitment to women's health, to deal with the health impact of unsafe abortions, and I think we want to do that as a major public health concern, and so they do declare that it is a major public health concern, and so do I. to reduce the recourse to abortion through expanded and improved family planning services. Prevention of unwanted pregnancies must always be given highest priority, and we also believe that, or I also believe that, and every attempt should be made to eliminate the need for abortion. Women who have unwanted pregnancies should have ready access to reliable information and compassionate counseling. I do agree. All measures or change related to abortion within the health system can only be determined at the national or local level according to the laws, according to the national legislative process. In circumstances where abortion is not against the law, such abortion should be safe. In all cases, women should have access to quality service for management of complications arising from abortion, post-abortion counseling, which will also help to avoid repeat abortions. Countries should consider reviewing laws containing punitive measures against women who have undergone illegal abortions. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. Mr. Terrell.
Mr. Chairman, I'm so sorry, just for the record.
Maybe there's a rejoinder to that, Mrs. Colin.
Yes, I would just, in brief response to Mrs. Cuff, the member's comments and the information that she just read into the record, that there is no Beijing Convention.
It's a declaration.
It is a declaration. No, I believe you, perhaps just, okay, yes. There is no Beijing Convention, and this is a declaration which is non-binding. It's certainly not a treaty. So the point is that as you were reading it as being the text of a treaty, it gave the information a certain weight that was actually not correct. And therefore I wanted to, just for the record, make that correction. And the other thing too, another point of correction, is that treaties can in fact bind countries. It all depends on the kind of constitution and arrangements that you have as between countries. But in the case of Jamaica, treaties would have to, of course, be made into law, yes, as you do know as a legislator yourself. But it's not correct to make a general blanket statement. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Remember, and that's it. Clarifications are helpful, argumentation is not. The Honourable Mr. Terrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, just so that there are no clarifications after I've made my comment, that I would have not been here for the majority of the presentation. But I just wish to indicate, based on some of the points I heard as relates to infanticide, etc., that this committee would not be endorsing any sort of policy that would take abortion up to, I believe, the last time we were here, some members mentioned New York and late-term abortions, just to indicate that we do not support late-term abortions whatsoever. Infanticide is infanticide, and there's legislation that deals with infanticide. What we are examining as a committee is balancing the rights of citizens of Jamaica. There are some persons who have posited the view that Jamaica is a pluralistic society and all views ought to contend. There are persons who have indicated that for whatever reason known to them, they believe that they should have the option of seeking abortion in a safe environment, whether it's by reason of mental health, physical health, or whatever, to protect or to preserve the life of the mother. There are certain common law provisions, but certainly from a legal perspective, in terms of having certain provisions enshrined in our laws, that's the purpose of the committee, to examine the totality of the different views. In one committee meeting, the argument was raised as it relates to a young lady of Indian religion, Indian origin, Indian ethnicity generally, in Ireland who died because an abortion was not provided to her, even at the point when I believe the term is septicemia, when septicemia was there and she was literally dying, and the doctors refused to go ahead with the abortion because of the ambiguity in the law and whether or not, could the abortion be provided to preserve the life of the mother, but what stage were we at? And there was all of this ambiguity because at that point in time, the laws in Ireland did not specifically state that, yes, an abortion can be performed in such and such circumstances or whatever. And so she died. And one of the things her mom said, like, we're not even Christian. So how can you be telling us that some sort of Judeo-Christian law should apply, because the basis of the law was coming from that perspective in that case, that law should apply to us and have my Indian daughter die. And the daughter, she was a doctor as well. Ireland, as you all know, is a strong Catholic country, and Ireland has since moved to a position where abortion is allowed. And that case, I heard her name eludes me at this point in time. But that case was the starting point for the changing of laws in Ireland, simply because it is recognized that in pluralistic societies, all views must be able to contend. And whilst persons may not all share the same belief, they should have equal coverage under the law. I would also wish to posit that from the arguments that we've heard thus far, again, from discussions with my colleagues here, no one would be moved or it would be in agreement to this sort of wholesale abortion on demand. Again, that's not why we're here. It is simply just to hear the divergent views stemming from the fact that this is a democracy and different persons will have different views.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted some clarity from Member Terrelong. I'm wondering what is the difference, the thing that we don't agree on, that we don't share? Is it that we don't agree that the unborn child is a child? Because I'm not quite clear on the point of divergence. The issue of whether we live in a pluralistic society or not is the one that has arisen up until now.
It's at the point
I'm wondering, you see, pardon me. That obviously is a fundamental question. I think your views on it have been clearly expressed. I think in his presentation, so have Mr. Terrelong's. The argumentation about that, I don't know how that advances our committee. Obviously, it's an issue that will go to the question of law, of what law is appropriate for Jamaica. But I'm very, very concerned that whenever we come here, that what we don't do is have a contest, a debate about abortion. If we do that, I don't think it's going to be helpful to our final determination. If you persist with the question, Mrs. Golden-Nicholson, fine, but I see it going in a direction that's going to keep us here indefinitely.
Mr. Chairman, I will be guided by you, sir.
Yes, Dr. Ferguson.
Just to say, and I know that there are persons who will make presentation relative to pro-choice as we go along. But I have always believed that this committee must be listening. Few of us are medical practitioners, few of us are lawyers, but the arguments, if abortion was simple and the arguments around it, would have resolved this a long time ago. It's a very, very difficult subject, like hanging and other things that we have discussed and debate.
And what is important is that we're having the full contending views.
That is the point. And therefore, at some point,
yeah,
in order to move to whatever changes, a debate will have to take place. I mean, debate relative to, why is it that we would want to change this section of the law? Why is it we would want to change it? And so, we are coming here now and we are listening to one viewpoint this afternoon. Next week, I think we are listening to...
Next time.
And I just believe that, and I take the point that if we were to argue now, as we go along, we would never get out of here. But at some point in time, they're going to have to, because there are many persons whose position have changed based on evidence, based on facts, based on medicine. So it is something for us. I am in this committee. I've had some medical training, but I don't come to the table believing that my position is firm and immovable. I think as we go along and the presentations are made and the discussions take place, and our own moral compass relative to, although that is
I appreciate your position, and it is a correct position. Guide me, though. Are you relating this to the process of the committee? Okay. Because what I think is a responsibility of a parliamentary committee is to allow every interest group on the subject to have full opportunity to ventilate. For our sins, it is up to us at the end of the day to come to a discussion and a conclusion on the validity, the preference of the various regarding the various viewpoints, and to submit a report. If there is any element in the presentations that is missing, then certainly if the chairman is responsible for that, he should be corrected. Yes, to make sure everything does come out.
Chair, yeah. I want to be clear. When this committee report goes back to Parliament, it will be debated.
Yes.
Will it be a conscience vote?
That would be, that's a political decision which resides with the leaders of the party and the appropriate whips. I would hope that it is. I would expect that it is.
If it is not, we're going to go back down this route we have gone.
Yes.
Well, I think debated from the 70s.
Well, I think that one of the things that we should do, and we're preempting our discussions within the committee, is to certainly recommend that it be such. Be a conscience vote. I can't imagine that either of the political parties in this country would be able to impose a whip on this matter. And in fact, I'm very certain that that wouldn't be possible or isn't desired. Yes. I hope this interchange has been helpful, I think, to everybody. You know where you stand, you know where we stand. Thank you very much once again, the Lawyers Christian Fellowship. It's 3:45, and we continue now with the Love March movement. Dr. Thomas, will you lead? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. If I could just respond to two things that were said just quickly before I start. Speaking from the people's perspective, I think a referendum would be definitely the way to go in terms of deciding the right to life of the people. All right, so if we could just consider the people's opinions a little bit more, we'd really appreciate it. All right. Secondly, in the case of septicemia of the Indian young lady, the doctors in Jamaica there's no ambiguity at all. So I am currently working at the neonatal unit at the Victoria Jubilee Hospital, where a mother is sick and it is not possible to prolong the pregnancy any further. The baby is delivered and given a fighting chance. The baby is carried down to our unit, placed in an incubator, and appropriate treatment is given in order to sustain life as much as is humanly possible. Okay? So just to start now. Distinguished Chair, the Honorable Reverend Ronald Thwaites, members of the committee, members of staff at the House of Parliament, colleagues, good afternoon. As was just said, I'm Dr. Thomas. This is Mr. Tavares, who is an attorney at law, Ms. Facey, who is a physiotherapist, and behind me we have a human resource manager, Mrs. Jones, and Dr. Clacken, a member of the team as well. We have some vice presidents of our organization. I yield to Ms. Tavares to commence.
Good afternoon and thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Tavares.
Yes, good afternoon. The Love March movement is a youth Christian organization committed to protecting life and the institution of the family. We do this by advocating for marriage, the protection of our youth, and the restoration of healthy sexual attitudes and practices. Now, our membership is comprised of persons between the ages of 18 and 30 years, and we note that 41.5% of Jamaica's population falls within this age bracket. But what's even more interesting to note is that 100% of Jamaicans were once unborn children. Now, youth are not just our future, but our present. The power and potential of the youngest among us, unborn children, therefore should not be overstated, can't be overstated, and therefore should not be ignored or discarded. The Love March movement is categorically opposed to the motion moved by member Cuthbert Flynn on June 5, 2018, and we aim to give rational and persuasive arguments for our objections in our submissions today. And we aim to highlight, firstly, the philosophical deficiencies in the arguments for abortion. We aim to speak briefly on the law, the negative impact of abortion on women, youth, and the family, and also consider alternatives to abortion. I'll begin by making 2 points on philosophy and the law. Now, let's define abortion. As mentioned previously, abortion is the deliberate procedure to kill a living unborn child. And every word of this definition is important and therefore deserves breaking down. So let's start with abortion is deliberate. The death of the unborn child after this procedure is not an unfortunate side effect of the abortion procedure. It is the purpose of abortion. Secondly, abortion is a procedure. The invasive physical dynamics of abortion is often taken for granted and overshadowed by an exclusive focus on the outcome of the procedure. That is, a mother no longer being pregnant. Abortion is a violent and brutal process, and it takes various forms. And even the mother can be traumatized by the insertion and movement of the instruments inside highly sensitive parts of her body. Thirdly, abortion kills. It's impossible to end life that does not exist. In fact, between 16 and 18 days, the baby's heart is already beating. Oh, I'm sorry. Abortion kills a child. An unborn child is a human being. The only being that two humans can logically produce is a human being. An unborn child is not pre-human, neither does an unborn child become human. An unborn child is human. And seeing that the humanity of the unborn child is an indisputable biological fact, it cannot be justified on the basis of biology or medicine. It ultimately rests on a deficient philosophy that dictates that a person who is small, dependent, vulnerable, and whose existence is deemed as inconvenient should be murdered by his or her own mother with the sanction of the state. And this approach is damaging to the youth of this nation, since we too are physically less developed than adults, vulnerable, and financially dependent on our parents and guardians. And it's politically incongruent to claim to empower and protect the youth of this nation, as stated in Vision 2030, and simultaneously desire to facilitate the massacre of unborn youth, especially in light of the fact that every participant in this discussion was once an unborn child. Now, as mentioned earlier, as we move on to a discussion on the law, there is no right to abortion. There is none. We noted, as the Lawyers Christian Fellowship noted previously, that the honorable member included reference to several international instruments in her motion, and we note that these instruments do not, in fact, call for abortion. We want to make that clear because the wording of the motion would have suggested as if there was some international obligation on our part to legalize abortion. That's not the case. Now, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Ms. Facey, to speak on the negative impact of abortion on women.
Thank you, Ms. Tavares. The MP mentioned the commitment to health, and so we think it would be remiss of us not to examine the negative impact of abortion on women. So abortion not only lacks biological rationale and international recognition, but also physical safety, even for the mother who is the alleged beneficiary. Abortion is neither safe for unborn women in the womb nor outside the womb. In order to ensure that the gravity of the negative impact of abortion on women and teens, since the Termination of Pregnancy Act calls for abortion in teenagers, that depth is understood and that the harm to women is truly understood, I have devised a compilation of statistically proven risks of bodily harm and psychological damage caused by abortion. 1. Psychiatric disorders and ultimately treatment. A review of medical records, 56,741 California Medicaid patients revealed that women who had abortions were 160% more likely than delivering women to be hospitalized for psychiatric treatment in the first 90 days following abortion or delivery. Psychiatric treatment rates remained significantly higher for at least 4 years. The references are there in the written submission. Suicide. Compared to pregnant women who had their babies, pregnant women who aborted are 6 to 7 times more likely to die of suicide. Substance abuse. Women who abort are 5 times more likely to report subsequent drug and alcohol abuse than women who deliver. Among women who had unintended first pregnancies and pursued abortions, they were more likely to report an average of 4 years later more frequent and recent use of alcohol, marijuana, and cocaine than women who gave birth. Finally, infertility and reproductive risks. Abortion can damage reproductive organs and cause long-term and sometimes permanent problems that can put future pregnancies at risk.
Sorry, Ms. Tavares, did I miss you? Did you quote your source?
I mentioned that they were there in the written submission. For the sake of time, okay. I would hope to.
All right, thank you. Yes, that came earlier.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
And I'm Ms. Facey, your chair.
I'm sorry.
That's fine. Women who have abortions are more likely to experience ectopic pregnancies, infertility, hysterectomies, stillbirths, miscarriages, and premature births than women who have not had abortions. That's a study, detrimental effects of abortion, and you'll see it there in the footnote. So let us consider carefully, Chair, the ramifications and dangers that this act is proposing for our women. And I will now hand over to Dr. Daniel Thomas, who will take us through the increased negative effects on abortion for youth. Thank you.
Go ahead, Dr. Thomas.
Thank you. Any deleterious effect of abortion on adult women is even more acute in teenage girls. In terms of psychological risks, we're looking at 4 factors quickly. Firstly, suicide. Teenagers are 6 times more likely to attempt suicide if they have had an abortion in the last 6 months than teens who have not had an abortion. Teens who abort are up to 4 times more likely to commit suicide than adults who abort. In terms of mental disorders, teens who abort are more likely to develop psychological problems and nearly 3 times more likely to be admitted to mental health hospitals than teens in general. Here it would be our Bellevue Hospital. Lack of parental support. About 40% of teen abortions take place with no parental involvement, leaving parents unaware about subsequent emotional or physical problems. Teens risk further injury or death because they are likely to not inform parents. They are unlikely, rather, to inform parents of any physical complications. And this is in specific response to Section 5(1)(b) of the Termination of Pregnancy Act, which actually speaks to children being unable to, any mentally competent woman, right, who it describes as being 16 years or younger who has not been diagnosed with a mental illness, being able to get an abortion without parental consent, okay, which, by the way, is unique to any procedure done in medicine for a minor. In terms of emotional and social pressure, teens are more likely to abort because of pressure from their parents or a partner. Teens are more likely to have riskier late-term abortions. According to the Center for Disease Control, approximately 30% of abortions among teens take place at 13 weeks gestation or greater, compared to only 12% among women in general. Late-term abortions are associated with more severe psychological complications. This is often because the woman wants to continue the pregnancy but ends up aborting because of pressure from others or her circumstances. So this just goes to show the disproportionate negative effect on young people because of abortion. In terms of physical risks, there are 4 here for your consideration. Cervical lacerations. Teens who abort are up to twice as likely to experience cervical lacerations during abortion compared to older women. This increased risk is thought to be due to the fact that the teens have smaller cervices and the difficulty with which these services can be grasped with the actual instruments and dilators, etc. Serious infections. Teens are also at higher risk for post-abortion infections such as pelvic inflammatory disease and endometritis. Other studies have shown that, and all the references are in the document, other studies have shown that young women who have had pelvic inflammatory disease previously or who have not had a previous full-term birth are more vulnerable to post-abortion infections. In addition, because teens are less likely than adults to take prescribed antibiotics or to follow other regimens of treatment, they are at an increased risk of infertility, hysterectomy, ectopic pregnancies, and other serious complications. In terms of breast cancer, because teens are more likely to abort their first pregnancy, they face other risks as well. For instance, research has shown that an early full-term birth can reduce a woman's risk of breast cancer, but that induced abortion of a first pregnancy carries a 30 to 50% increased risk of breast cancer. In addition, aborting teens lose the protective effect of having a full-term pregnancy at a younger age, which again increases their risk. Repeat abortions. Teens are 4 times more likely to repeat abortions. Among pregnant teens, those who had an abortion were at least 4 times more likely to abort, and it traps teens in a vicious cycle. In terms of the negative impact of abortion on the family, abortion has a noxious effect not only on the victim, the unborn child who is killed, the participant, the adult woman or teenage girl, but also on the wider family unit. Subsequent children are negatively affected. The children of women who have had abortions have less supportive home environments and more behavioral problems than the children of women without a history of abortion. This finding supports the view that abortion may negatively affect bonding with subsequent children, disturb mothering skills, and otherwise impact a woman's psychological stability, and the references are noted. Physical abuse. One study found that women with a history of induced abortions were 144% more likely to physically abuse their children than women who had not had an abortion. Abortion is linked with increased violent behavior, alcohol and drug abuse, replacement pregnancies, depression, and poor maternal bonding with later children. These factors are closely associated with child abuse and would appear to confirm a link between unresolved post-abortion trauma and subsequent child abuse, and the references are noted. I now hand over to Ms. Tavares for alternatives to abortion.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Now, as a youth movement, it really pains our heart, cuts us to the core, that almost over 10 years ago, in 2008, fulsome and well-researched recommendations were made by several civil society groups to a committee much like this one to consider alternatives to abortion, and it hurts to know that at this stage, these recommendations have not been implemented, and what we have instead is a reinvigorated thrust to perpetuate the culture of death in our society and to sanction the spilling of innocent blood in our streets and add to that blood which is already running rampant in our beloved nation. So I want to say that, nevertheless, I will mention recommendations that we have, which we're repeating because these were mentioned in 2008. We recommend that additional funding be allocated to pregnancy resource centers, as well as strengthening and streamlining adoption in Jamaica. We wish to see more resources specifically directed to pregnancy resource centers that provide health care and therapy for the mother, places of refuge and safety for women and their children, as well as initiatives that provide material substances to offset the cost of having a baby. And in the long term, we encourage Parliament to review the laws surrounding the adoption process to ameliorate it and make it less cumbersome. We note that Member Floyd Green had recently announced that the government was making some headway in this regard. However, as he has been transferred to another ministry, we're not sure if that is still underway. We would like to encourage that to continue. When we reached out to the staff of the adoption unit at the Child Protection and Family Services Agency in January 2019, seeking to discover and learn what challenges they face on a daily basis, we found that there were over 100 persons waiting to be matched with a child as at January 2019. And that should not be the case. We want to encourage this committee to recommend real solutions. Jamaica is a country that loves babies. We love children and we love life. And it's counterproductive to want to encourage a society that respects human life when we don't respect the most vulnerable amongst us. Yes, finally, we want to say that Jamaica's youth deserve better than abortion. Abortion is a cheap, careless mask for deep-rooted, pervading, complex problems that are undermining our society, such as rape, fatherlessness, and a lack of respect for human life. Abortion never heals a pregnant woman's trauma or crisis. We therefore want to urge this honorable House to protect the life of the unborn, our women and youth, and our family structure from further dismemberment and instability. Every child deserves the right to live. Let us defend that right and truly make Jamaica the place to live and raise families. We, the youth, are depending on you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does that conclude your presentation?
It does. It does.
Thank you. Questions from the committee, if any? Yes. Yes, Mr. Terrell. Question, please, sir. No, I'm encouraging you to ask a question. Please.
If only the issue before us were that simple. But all right, I'll start with the. So in previous committee sittings, we have encouraged members to stay away from inflammatory words like careless, etc. Because what we don't want is we don't want anyone to think that we are labeling anyone or stigmatizing them for any personal decision that they would have made, not knowing the reasons as to why they would have made a particular decision or would be seeking to make a decision, and we don't wish to label anyone as careless or to say a decision that they've made is careless, etc. So we've asked all members who appear before us to be respectful and mindful of those things, all right? Because we're all here, as I indicated, to advance arguments, and everyone will have their different views. And another thing, just to indicate as well that we all love babies, we all love life, and what persons have indicated is that this is not about pro-life or anti-life. Everyone here is pro-life. We are all pro-life. It's a question of choice. Is it pro-choice or anti-choice? And persons have asked us to make that very, very clear. Persons with different views from yours have asked us to make that very, very clear that everyone is about pro-life. And when we speak of abortion, they've indicated also that they're about preserving the life of the mom as well and preserving the quality of life that the mom ought to enjoy as her human right as well. So just to indicate that. Dr. Thomas, I have here from the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and their report indicates clearly, this document reflects emerging clinical and scientific advances as of the date issue. All right, so let me go back to the abstract. Induced abortion and the myth about breast cancer risk. The relationship between induced abortion and the subsequent development of breast cancer has been the subject of a substantial amount of epidemiological study. Early studies of the relationship between prior induced abortion and breast cancer risk were methodologically flawed. More rigorous recent studies demonstrate no causal relationship between induced abortion and a subsequent increase in breast cancer risk. So my question is, are you aware of the association known as the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists?
Yes.
And are you aware of this report where they indicate that the recent studies demonstrate no causal relationship between abortion and increased risk in breast cancer?
No, I was not aware of that. But what we sought to do was to search out and find what are the actual adverse effects. Because one thing, anytime that there is a procedure, it is the role of the doctor to obtain informed consent, which means listing all the possible.
Dr. Thomas, with respect, Dr. Thomas. Dr. Thomas, with respect.
If I could finish my sentence.
No, 1 second, Dr. Thomas.
Please let him answer.
No, it's not that. No, I'm coming to that.
But please let him answer.
Coming to what? If I could finish my sentence, please.
I am directing something to the chairman, Dr. Thomas. If you could hang on.
Mr. Chair, please. If I could finish my sentence.
You may, and then, Minister. Thank you very much. Good.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
No, he's giving me the ability to speak.
The doctor was in the middle of answering. I think you ought to let him finish.
So I was saying, it is extremely important for the doctor to list all possible adverse effects anytime a procedure is about to take place, especially a surgical procedure which comes at significant risk. So we just sought to outline a few of the adverse effects that were possible. And so that is why breast cancer got in the list. There could have been another one. There are many other things that we could have selected. Okay, I understand and accept your point, though. Thank you.
Could I just clarify something, please? What I'm understanding is that you are not in a position to controvert the view that Minister Terrelong has just put. Yes. Okay, thanks.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. I may be able to contradict that with the study that we cited, and it's in our written review. So wherever it is that Mr. Terrelong brought his study up, we do have one here that does outline breast cancer as being one of the risks of induced abortions. And causality is not the same as a risk.
And is it part of your submission?
Yes, it is.
Okay, therefore
yes, it is. Thank you.
Yes, that was circulated some time ago, and I don't think we have it. So, in the circumstances, you've been helpful. What we will do is to look at the details of that study, as well as advert to what is on the record that Minister Terrelong has raised, and we will come to our conclusion.
Thank you, Chair. That's all we ask.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just for clarity, I'd just like to know the institution or organization from which that study is taken.
You have it in your documents. You want it again?
Yes.
Yes, okay. You have the document. You have the reference there? Yes, please give it then.
So one is from the monthly vital statistics report, induced terminations of pregnancy reporting states by KD Kochank. So it's footnote 21 in our submission. Another is J. Bryant, epidemiological and community health, induced abortion as an independent risk factor for breast cancer. Yes, a comprehensive review and analysis. So that's footnote 22 as well.
All right, thank you. As I indicated, the report we have here from the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, I don't know if he's your president, Dr. Daniel Thomas has indicated that he accepts it, and while you might have reason to I'll just ask you to look at it, all right? It's a recent study, and it goes to that. You indicated, Doctor, you spoke about psychological trauma, physical trauma, suicide, when you were looking at the negative effects. I just want to ask you, do you have similar data, or have you considered similar data for young people who are the victims of rape and incest? I just want to know if you have similar data.
Sorry, Mr. Tavares will respond in terms of the data.
Thank you. I think it's through the chair, Mr. Chairman. I think that's a valid question, and it's interesting that not as much research has been done in that area, despite the use of that exception frequently in the abortion debate. However, a study was done by McHorn and David Reardon entitled "Pregnancy and Sexual Assault: The Psychological Aspects of Abortion," which was published in the Washington, D.C. University Publications of America, and the other one was published in Loyola University Press. And what these studies found, after they interviewed 197 women who had become pregnant after either rape or incest, they found that in both studies, over 70% of these women wanted to keep their children, which runs against the popular rhetoric that when a woman is raped or is the victim of incest, that she automatically views her child as the child of the rapist. What they also found, Dr. McHorn found, was that abortion in the case of rape and incest is a contraindication. In no case should it be made available to a rape victim or a victim of incest, because it re-traumatizes the victim, that the pain and trauma that is caused by the abortion following a severely traumatic event, it's completely compounds the situation. And that is what the research found. I would encourage Minister Terrelong to go and consider it. And also would like to direct the conversation back to the issue of the family, noticing that the discussion on abortion has excluded the father altogether. Recently, Dr. Thomas was attending a conference, and a father who several years prior, his former partner had an abortion without consulting him, spoke of the incredible pain and hurt and anguish and anger within his heart, and that he has to grapple with in a world that says to him, this is a woman's issue, this is a woman's issue, you have nothing to do with it. However, the same world says, the same country says that, father, you need to become more involved in your child's life. Where are the fathers? But these same fathers are excluded from the discussion. And abortion is not a woman's issue. It's a human issue.
Can I ask you a question, Mr. Tavares?
As soon as I finish my sentence.
I'm sorry, no, you raised a point about fathers.
Mr. Terrelong.
I don't want to lose the point. It goes to the father.
No, I don't think you will lose the point, sir. Could you just finish quickly?
All right.
Yes. I forgot that thing. The issue, Mr. Chairman, is that there needs to be a holistic discussion on this issue that does not just consider the woman, but the family.
Yes, I think we've got that very clearly from you.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Mr. Terrelong.
Do you have any sort of data? You spoke about the father. Let's say for every 100 abortions that take place, do you have any sort of data that speaks to the number of fathers? Do you have any data that speaks to, let's say, abortion per 100? How many fathers are traumatized, or how many fathers have come forward to say, out of 100, to say, well, I wish I had a part in the decision-making process or anything like that?
I would encourage, Mr. Chairman, I would encourage the member to go through our presentation again, particularly the section on the family, where we have several references that consider the studies on the impact on the family and children and fathers. I'm
sorry, Mr. Tavares, I've asked you a specific question.
Yes.
Do you have any data that speaks to the number of... You brought fathers into the discussion, ma'am. I asked a question about rape. You segued that question about rape and you gave a very passionate speech about fathers, and you spoke of one particular father, Mr. Tavares. My question to you is simply, from the collection of data, do you have anything that speaks to... Because remember, we're here to learn. We're here to have a discussion, ma'am. So whilst you're very passionate and I admire your passion, etc., I just wish for you to answer my question. Do you have any data, having brought the question of fathers into the discussion, yes, that suggests that For every 100 abortions that takes place, there are X amount of fathers who've come forward and that they're traumatized or that they wish they were a part of the discussion. That's all I'm asking. If the data is not there, it's not there. I just want to know if you have it.
And through the chair, if we could answer, what Ms. Tavares was trying to say is we had to go through great pains to create a written submission that is riddled with resources that references studies that has been done. So we're asking firstly that you review those first. Secondly, it would be difficult to capture some of that data for varying reasons. One, the conversation is most times minimized to just a woman's issue, and so it's very difficult to capture that information. And thirdly, we ask that the committee, in its thorough examination of this issue, conduct some research that the Love March movement would be grateful to participate in assisting with. We would absolutely love to capture that data and have that fulsome discussion right here. But in the meantime, we would ask that the member considers the references 22 to 27 in our submission that does touch on that issue. Thank you.
Okay, so the short answer is no, you don't have that data present. Thank you.
Members of the committee, we will be losing our quorum shortly. So I'm hoping that can conclude the comments on the Love March's presentation. And Dr. Ferguson, we understand your situation, and I am hoping that we can invite Mrs. Shirley Richards to... Pardon? One more. Just one more. Thank you very much, Love March. And yes, Ms. Facey, I think we accept any references that you may wish to give further. Ms. Richards, afternoon, your time.
Yes. May I go ahead, please?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Good afternoon to you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. First, let me just express concern that a conscience vote is being considered. The fact is that parliamentarians are here to represent the views of their constituents, not their own views on matters on which they vote. They are here to represent the people, and so that is of great concern to us to hear that that is being considered.
I beg your pardon, Ms. Richards, just let me clarify something. Are you people who vote by their conscience do not exclude the views informing their conscience of the people they represent?
Sometimes that takes is a major part of how you would be voting to, outside of your own understanding. If you know that the persons within your constituents are saying something, you can't ignore it. Well, if you do it to your own detriment.
Let's just clear that point. Thank you, Ms. Richards. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. And a few other preliminary points before I get into my submission. Just a reminder that law affects culture and vice versa. Also that every law posits a worldview. There was discussion earlier about whether it's pro-choice or anti-choice, but we submit that choice cannot be separated from the object of the choice. It's either a choice for the preservation of the life of the unborn child or a choice for the termination, the death of the unborn child. So as I go into my submissions, let me say we adopt the reasoning of Professor Robert George of Princeton University that we should resolve these issues on the basis of the best scientific evidence as to when life begins. And secondly, the most careful philosophical reasoning as to what is owed to a human being at any stage of his development. So you see, we do agree that all views should contend in a democratic, pluralistic society. Professor George goes on to point out that, and I quote, "A human embryo is a human individual in the earliest stage of his natural development." In fact, Professor George refers to a human individual in the earliest stage of development as an embryonic human being. Let me start at the very beginning, the question of when life begins. Here is the testimony of Dr. Bernard Nathanson, obstetrician and gynecologist, who in 1984 testified before the Circuit Court, Montgomery County, Maryland, USA, in the case of Coleman, Donald Paul Coleman versus Constance Jean Coleman. His testimony in part was as follows, and I quote, "The question of its ethical permissibility has long centered on the issue of when life begins. In point of fact, we know exactly when life begins. It begins when the sperm meets the egg. We have been witness to it in the laboratories now. We see it happening, and there's no longer any question of doubt as to when life begins. It is very much on the order of one wondering when a fire begins. If there's a conflagration raging in the city, we know that at some point a spark was lit and the fire began. And we now know in biology that it is at the moment that the sperm meets the egg that the spark is lit. The fire is on, the continuum is established, and that will not die out until the biological life dies." End of quote. Interestingly, Dr. Nathanson classified himself as an atheist at that point in his life. But prior to making that statement, Dr. Nathanson has said that he was, and I quote, "as responsible as any single person in the United States for the uncaging of the abortion monster in this country." End of quote. He testified that it was in 1973, I think it's really 74, as a result of these new perceptions of the fetus, which we were afforded with these new technologies, that I began to question the ethical permissibility of the elective or non-medically induced abortion. End of quote. Mr. Chairman, I find it significant that Dr. Bourne in England and Dr. Nathanson in the USA, both of whom were significant figures in the pro-abortion movements in their countries, thinking at the time that abortion was right, that they both came to the point of regretting their involvement in the practice of abortion, with both becoming pro-life speakers. Then there's also the testimony of Dr. Jerome Lejeune, professor of fundamental genetics, Faculty of Medicine, Paris. Note, he discovered the first chromosomal disease in man, which is an extra chromosome in Down syndrome. And from that point, a new field of research was opened in human genetics. In the case of Junior L. Davis versus Mary Sue Davis, 1989, Blount County, Tennessee, USA, involving ownership of frozen embryos, Dr. Lejeune testified in part as follows, and I quote, "As far as your nature is concerned, I cannot see the difference between the early human being you were and the late human being you are, because in both cases you were and you are a member of our species. What defines a human being is he belongs to our species. So an early one or a late one has not changed from one species to another species. It belongs to our kin. That is the definition." End of quote. I want to look briefly at the situation in Canada, and this is against the background that we have heard members of this committee who support the implementation of the APRAG, that they're only speaking of legalizing abortions up to 6 weeks gestation. The reality is these two facts. Firstly, the APRAG actually recommends that abortions up to 22 weeks gestation and further be allowed, and further the wording of the recommendations lend itself to very little, if any, restrictions at all. Secondly, the current legal situation in Canada has lessons for us because of the similarity of the constitutional provisions between Canada and our own country. You see, Canada also has a Charter of Rights. In Canada, once such loophole was opened up with respect to abortions, effectively, eventually, and inevitably, all restrictions on abortions were eroded. And right now, there are no restrictions at all. This means that even sex selection abortions are legal in Canada. Dr. Henry Morgan Taylor used Canada's Charter of Rights to achieve what he wanted. If we open up a similar loophole, Jamaica will very likely end up where Canada is today. In brief, this is how it happened. A challenge was brought to the legality of the law against abortion in the 1975 case of Morgan Taylor versus the Queen. The court did not agree with this position. At that time, Canada's criminal code prohibited abortions, with the exception of abortions which were approved by the Therapeutic Abortion Committee of a hospital, on the grounds that the pregnancy would be likely to endanger the mother's life or health. Not satisfied with this, Dr. Morgan Taylor went back to the court in 1988, post-1982 Charter of Rights. This time, the Supreme Court ruled, pursuant to Section 7 of the Charter, that the requirement for certification from the Therapeutic Abortion Committee breached the woman's right to security of the person. That Section 7 states in part, and I quote, "Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person," similar to our Section 13(3)(a). Still, Dr. Morgan Taylor was not satisfied. He went back to the Supreme Court, challenging the requirement that abortions be performed in hospitals. The court upheld his challenge. Also, note the case of Freedom of Informed Choice Abortions Act. There was a provincial law which required the consent of the husbands or parents. This law was held to be invalid in that case. You can see that Dr. Morgan Taylor kept coming back for more and more until Canada today has absolutely no restrictions at all. Before the Charter of Rights, attempts to remove restrictions failed. But once they had a Charter of Rights, which is very similar to ours, they were able to remove all restrictions. This committee, therefore, needs to be aware that persons who push for abortion will not be satisfied with the exceptions which you may be thinking of, example, to allow for the killing of the embryonic human being. For once that door is opened, it very likely will be pushed wide open as persons exercise what is perceived as a right to kill the unborn child. I also want to look briefly at the situation in England. Those of you who were here 2 weeks ago will recall an extract from Dr. Mosley's presentation to this House, and I quote, "Since it became law, there have been more than 9 million abortions in Britain. Doctors are now trained to kill, despite medicine being about saving lives. Unlike doctors, nurses do not have the legal right to opt out of helping with abortions on the ground of conscience. Thus, the ethics of nursing, a profession that was founded on Christian principles of caring for the sick and the vulnerable, has been undermined. Similarly, the rights of disabled people are enshrined in UK equalities legislation, but abortion is permitted on the grounds of a baby's disability." End of quote. As an aside, I know that the eugenics aspect of the English legislation as it relates to disabled persons is an issue which had been pointed out by Mrs. Benka-Coker, QC, in a paper entitled "Abortion, Medical, Legal and Moral Issues" at a medical legal seminar delivered on the 5th of June, 1994. Mrs. Benka-Coker stated in relation to that section of the English law that, and I quote, "This is essentially the practice of eugenics. It authorizes the killing of the handicapped and abnormal, and the propagation of fine and healthy offspring." End of quote. I ask, who gives us the right to determine that seriously handicapped babies should not live? But let me get back to Dr. Moses' presentation. She also spoke of sex-selective abortions in England, which she said are being brushed under the carpet. She said in part that, and I quote, "One of the most shocking examples of the effect of abortion policy on the mentality of government institutions has been the way in which the scandal of sex-selective abortion has been brushed under the carpet. In 2012, an undercover investigation by The Telegraph found that some British doctors were performing sex-selective abortions at the request of parents, mainly on girls." End of quote. Note that a 2007 study done by 2 Oxford University academics supports what Dr. Moses said, as it was determined in said study that the practice of aborting one's child based on her being female was a statistical reality, or is a statistical reality, in the United Kingdom. I asked this committee then, is this what we want for Jamaica to have our unborn girls regarded as disposable items? I move now to a short paragraph on the purpose of law, and I note that I included this paragraph in response to some queries here concerning the purpose of law. Just some points to note. The penalty or consequence of a law is not the reason the act is wrong. The reason the act is wrong is that it's contrary to the common good. The common good in this case is the preservation of both the life of the unborn and also the life of the mother. B, the penalty stipulated is part of the system of deterrence. The law warns the mother against doing some acts which could have serious implications, both for her and for the unborn. C, concern for the preservation of life has always been a concern of the criminal law. The above is consonant with what Professors Baileyved and Brownsworth said in their book entitled Human Dignity in Bioethics and Biolaw, regarding Lord Templeman's view in the case of R.B. Brown, that the criminal law is for the protection of society's basic values. Laws that regulate the society should reflect its moral tenets. If this committee decides that the life within a mother's womb is human life, then to take that innocent human life is a wrong against society, against the community. We have a duty, one to the other, to see to each other's preservation. Then I move to the morality issue. We note with disappointment that the honourable member has sought to couch her motion, which would result in the destruction of human life, within the concept of morality. This use of the concept of morality to cloak this terribly unnatural practice of a woman taking the life of her own child is highly regrettable. Abortion is a moral issue. No law that seeks to justify same can wipe away the blood. To again quote from Mrs. Benka Coker, QC, the passage of laws will not make moral that which is basically immoral, end of quote. We would suggest to the honourable member that the moral position is to support the preservation of life, especially in this case of the weak and defenseless human life. As Greg Cookey of Stand to Reason observes, if the unborn is not human, then no justification for abortion is necessary. It would be no different from having a mole removed or a tooth pulled. But if the unborn is human, then no justification for abortion is adequate, end of quote. I move now to financial costs of abortions. In England, it was estimated that in 2010, taxpayers spent £118 million on abortions, with each abortion costing approximately £680. It was reported in 2012 that the NHF England was spending £1 million a week on repeat abortions. With the difference in size of populations, obviously the total expenditure locally would be much less. But with all the needs in our health system, is this where Jamaican taxpayers' monies ought to be placed? Is this how Jamaicans want their tax dollars spent? Wouldn't it benefit the country more if we spent the monies earmarked for abortion on providing greater care for premature babies? Then I deal with, I have a brief section on our law, Section 72 and 73 of the OAPA. This law helps us to firstly recognize that what is in the woman's womb is an unborn child. Secondly, it provides equality of protection to each unborn child, as the bar applies regardless of categories or stage of development. Thirdly, the law recognizes that the life of the unborn is valuable by imposing a serious maximum penalty to the killing of the unborn. In this age of an intense push for women to accept that they have a right to kill their own, we warn that any change to the law will result in us losing one or all three of these valuable principles. In concluding, I end where I began with a paraphrase of Professor George, of something said by Professor George. This is it. The debate about the value of unborn human life is sure to continue. But if that debate is informed by serious attention to the scientific facts of early human development and of the profound, inherent, and equal dignity of us as human beings, then we, as a nation, will reject the deliberate killing of the unborn, regardless of the promised benefits. I just want to give some recommendations. So I've heard the recommendations from others who have spoken in favor of preserving the life of the unborn. These recommendations I endorse. I also recommend as follows. A, the government is urged to implement public relations programs to get women and young girls to report rape and other forms of sexual abuse, including incest, promptly. This is both to prevent conception and also to quickly apprehend the rapist/offender. Warnings about the dangers of abortion should be part of such program. B, that the concepts of responsible reproduction and responsible parenting be promoted. Thirdly, that this committee rejects Motion 61 of 2018 in its entirety, with sections 72 and 73 of the OAPA remaining intact. Lastly, concerning all the evidence regarding the development of the unborn, the fact that abortion both kills unborn babies and hurts women, and also that there are alternatives to abortion, it is strongly being suggested that this committee recommends to the Parliament that it be explicitly stated that the right to life as set out in the Charter of Rights, Section 13(3)(a), be amended to state that said right begins at conception. That, ladies and gentlemen, is my presentation, and I thank you so much for the opportunity to share my thoughts on this matter of life and death. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Richards. Are there any questions from members?
Thank you, Mrs. Richards. I just want to thank you for the recommendations that you have actually made. I think most of the submissions that we've heard, we've not really gotten a lot of recommendations. And so I want to just thank you for those recommendations.
Join that as well. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for what has been a very fulsome session. Before we adjourn, and it may be of interest to you because I know you're connected with and interested in the further proceedings of this committee, Mr. Terrelong wasn't here when we indicated at the outset that the sectoral debate collides with two other dates that we had scheduled, and therefore I asked Ms. Brandon if she would be kind enough to indicate alternative dates. She has suggested that the Partnership for Women's Health and Wellbeing, I'm Glad I'm a Girl Foundation, and Ms. Claudia Williams should appear on June the 12th. That the Gatekeepers Joytown Community Development Foundation, a joint submission from Professor Afit McCaw-Binns and Professor Wendell Abel and Dr. Althea Bailey, along with a submission from Professor Opal Palmer Adisa and the Women and Men's for Women's Reproductive Freedom and Autonomy, should be heard on June 19th. And finally, on July 3rd, Dr. Frederick Nunes, Professor Carolyn Cooper, Mr. Romaine Stewart, the Caribbean Association for Feminist Research and Action, and the People's National Party Women's Movement. I seek the approval. That would be July 3rd? Yes. Those are the dates the Secretary has perused a busy calendar, or crowded calendar, and it puts us a little further down than we want it to be, but in the circumstances, I'm asking for your assent. Yes. Okay. But for the time being, unless other opportunities. Yes.
I'm sorry. So on average, how many persons would be?
Four.
4 groups per session?
Four per session, just as today. Okay. Yes. I think we should try and achieve that. Very well. It remains for me to thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Everything that you have said will be taken into full account. Please be assured of that. And members who have sat in the gallery, thank you so much for your decorum and for your presence. It means a lot for you to be here, and we, the members of the committee, would like to let you know that we appreciate your attention to this matter. If there is no further business now, may I have a motion for adjournment? Thank you, Dr. Ferguson. Thank you for seconding, Mrs. Cuthbert-Flynn. This committee meeting is adjourned. I didn't thank you, but you're thanked.
Throughout the month of April, PBCJ will share some facts with